Hello and welcome to Then and Now, a conversation with Hosea. Today is the 26th and final day as we read the 14th and final chapter of the book of Hosea. My name is Derek Hovind. I'm the pastor at Salem Lutheran Church in Orlando, Florida. And for 26 days now, we have read the entirety. Today we'll finish up the book of Hosea, looked at it in its own context, and then let the prophet put some questions before us. I've continued to remind us that the book alternates between accusation and punishment of the people for their false worship, for their unjust economics, their war, and all the rest of it, but often then coming back to the new things that God is doing in places of hope. And the 14th chapter really lands in those places of hope. Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God, for you have stumbled because of your iniquity. Take words with you and return to the Lord. Say to him, take away all guilt, accept that which is good, and we will offer the fruit of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride upon horses. We will say no more, our God, to the work of our hands. If you, the orphan, in you the orphan finds mercy. I will heal their disloyalty, and I will love them freely, for my anger has turned from them. I will be like the dew to Israel. He shall blossom like the lily. He shall strike root like the forests of Lebanon. His shoot shall spread out, his beauty shall be like the olive tree, and his fragrance like that of Lebanon. They shall again live beneath my shadow. They shall flourish as a garden. They shall blossom like the vine. Their fragrance shall be like the wine of Lebanon. O Ephraim, what have I to do with idols? It is I who answer and look after you. I am like an evergreen cypress. Your faithfulness comes from me. Those who are wise understand these things. Those who are discerning know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. In this 14th chapter, we start in a place where we've been a couple other times on the journey, and that's a subtle call to confession. Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God, for you have stumbled. And there's instructions on how to do that. Take words with you, words of confession. And that confession is very particular, right? It says, Assyria shall not save us. So in the confession is an admonition that, or an admission that the foreign alliances were inappropriate places to look for salvation. They say, we will say no more our God to the things of our hands. So it's an admission that we've made these idols, this false worship, we're not going to do that anymore. And then it turns to an assurance of forgiveness to the people. I will heal their disloyalty. I will love them freely. All of this rides on the end of verse 3, where it says, in you the orphan finds mercy, right? So the people have been orphaned by their false faith. And now this word of I will heal their disloyalty, I will love them freely, is this promise from God that answers into the failure of their leadership, the failure of their priests, the failure of their worship, the failure of their alliances, the failure of their war. All of that God is answering with promises. And then there's a bunch of imagery in verses 5 through 7 that answers the previous imagery. In chapter 13, the people were accused of being like the morning dew and the mist, right, and the smoke that blows away. And here, God says, I will be like the dew to Israel, but it's the dew that brings blossom, the dew that allows roots to take root. And then at the other part of that chapter, right, there was this idea that this parched wind blows in and leaves the people dry and thirsty. And then the rest of this imagery lives in that place of flourishing and gardens and vines and fragrance and wine and all of this stuff that speaks to not prosperity, but provision of health and things growing and thriving. So the promises of God that answer the unfaithfulness of the people land in these spaces of growth and life. But then there's this just really important part in verse 8. It says, God says, I am an evergreen cypress. Your faithfulness comes from me. God is saying to the people that, right, this covenant that they have failed at, their unfaithfulness, the places they have moved away, the faithfulness that will bring them to someplace new comes from God, not from themselves. Otherwise, they could turn right back to trusting in their own hands and their own work, to build their own idols to chase again, right? So God is trying to break that connection and say, it's not your work but mine that gets you to these places. And ultimately, then it comes to this last verse, for the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. That sounds like a tough place to end, right? We were so hopeful here that something was going to be new, but then transgressors stumble at the very last. And instead of that being a note of final failure, perhaps what it is saying is that all of this alternating between accusation and punishment and hope, ultimately we understand, because God's faithfulness is where the work comes from, that we will stumble, and that all of this hope is really meant to be for those who have stumbled. So for all of the accusations, right, all of it is an honest assessment of the failure of the people, but that honest assessment of failure is then met with these promises of life, these promises of faithfulness from God that will ultimately overcome the failures of the people as they go. And that is not a bad place to end a book that is full of some tough imagery and some harsh words from God toward the people. So then we can ask, how might the prophet then put a question before us this day? Many of the questions that we have been asking have been about our systems and our injustice and our unfaithfulness. And since this starts with a word of confession, the question that we might ask is, what words of confession, right? It said, bring your words. What words of confession might we bring to God about all of our reflecting to this point, right? Where has our unfaithfulness been? Where has our injustice been? Where has our trust been misplaced? And how might we speak those words and then trust God's promises then to come back toward that place of confession with the faithfulness that shapes us into something new and picks us up from our stumbling and carries us along. That's not a bad place to end, some confession and promise. Thank you for being with me these 26 days and 14 chapters, wrestling with Hosea. I hope it's been a fruitful journey for you. Before too long, I'm hoping to jump into the book of Joel and just keep reading through these minor prophets. As I record this, we're headed towards the season of Christmas, and I pray that you have a blessed holiday season. Peace.